Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin in just a moment and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesday and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, the webinar will be recorded, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. We have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who's here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last 20 to 30 minutes to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. We are live streaming the webinar on Facebook Live. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants, and materials are accessible on the Grade Level Readings Campaign for Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, also known as CLIP. We invite you to take a few seconds to create a free account if you haven't done so already, so you don't miss the materials from today's conversation. Finally, we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Also, before we start, I'd like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Tuesday webinars. I invite you all to tune back in today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for a conversation with outschool.org and some of its partners and grantees as they share how outschool.org is working to increase access to fun and social learning experiences for low-income kids, families, and communities. For anyone who missed the incredible session hosted in partnership with the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy and Education Week last month, focused on how to connect trauma-informed practices with the construction of the deep reading brain, we will have a special rebroadcast of that session next week in the 3 p.m. Eastern time slot. We will wrap up the month with the following week with a session hosted in partnership with the Bezos Family Foundation, lifting up some of the major lessons from the pandemic, also in the 3 p.m. Eastern time slot. And as we get closer to the holiday and the end of the year, we will continue to offer a robust lineup of sessions in December, starting off with a session on December 7th in partnership with the Overdeck Family Foundation, exploring how out-of-school STEM programs can boost both social, emotional, and academic learning. Information and registration for these sessions will be posted in the chat box. Joining you now is Sarah Torian. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Jenny, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's Funder to Funder conversation entitled Meeting the Moment, Philanthropic Opportunities for Promoting the Child Tax Credit. For those of you who have joined in these webinars in the past, you may remember that these funder-focused sessions are designed to bring together funders working at the national, state, and local levels for peer learning and to explore opportunities for increased alignment and collaboration. Today's session offers a perfect example of the power of this kind of collaboration, as it features a collaborative of funders working at the national level to promote the child tax credit. These national funders know well the incredible assets that state and local funders have to offer, the deep local knowledge, the networks, and the earned credibility. And so they are investing in local funders, providing matching funding, as well as compiling a wealth of tools that local funders can use to promote the child tax credit. Why should community foundations, United Ways, and other local funders committed to child development care about federal tax policies like the CTC and the EITC? You might ask. Well, we're going to dig into that later on in the conversation, while also lifting up some of the tools, the information, and the resources that local funders can deploy and take action, and their partners in the community. And to begin that conversation, I am incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our panel for today. It's a rockstar panel of leaders who bring a wealth of insights and expertise in both philanthropy and policy. Introducing them in alpha order. First, we have Mary Louise McClintock, Mary Louise has been with the Oregon Community Foundation since 2003, serving first as a consultant, then director of early childhood, and now is senior education strategy and policy advisor, while also serving on the leadership team for the National Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. Mary Louise brings a wealth of policy expertise, having previously served as child care coordinator for the state of Oregon, and also working for the U.S. Congress and the Oregon Legislative Assembly. In addition, she's a member of Oregon Governor Kate Brown's Children's Cabinet. So welcome, Mary Louise. Next, I'd like to welcome and introduce Sue Renner. Sue directs the Mirage Foundations, a consortium of 7 foundations and nonprofits representing 3 generations of the David and Laura Mirage family in Denver, Colorado. With a focus on venture philanthropy, Sue provides strategic oversight for Care for All Children and early learning ventures, among other initiatives, and plays an integral role in Mirage Foundation's advocacy efforts surrounding early childhood policy. She's a member of the Colorado Governor Jared Polis's Education Policy Council and the Colorado Early Childhood Leadership Commission, and is also an advisor to the Bipartisan Policy Center's Early Childhood Initiative. So welcome, Sue. Welcome also to Megan Tybus. Megan is Director of Economic Mobility Initiatives at the United Way for Southeastern Michigan, where she oversees multiple strategic initiatives at the intersection of economic mobility, financial empowerment, housing, workforce development, and transportation in the Detroit metro region. Previously, Megan served in the mayor's office at the city of Detroit, in the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and at HUD, as well as working for a number of nonprofits serving the low-income population. Welcome, Megan. Also joining us today is Susan True. Susan has served as CEO of the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County since 2018, having previously led the Kenneth Rainin Foundation's education investments, creating programs that dramatically increase literacy skills among Oakland children, and leading the design of the Bay Area Council's Early Childhood Talk, Read, Sing campaign. Formerly, Susan served as Executive Director of First Five of Santa Cruz County and as the Executive Director of CASA of Santa Cruz County. So welcome, Susan. And last, but certainly not least, is Shelley Waters Boots. Shelley brings a wealth of 20 years of experience as a writer, researcher, and policy expert on a wide range of issues affecting the lives of children and families, and is a national expert on 2-generation approaches to alleviating poverty for low-income families, partnering with philanthropy, state governments, and nonprofits to help them better align family services. Today, for today's session, she is working closely with the CTC Funder Collaborative that we'll be learning about later on, and has been a huge help to me in planning today's conversation. So thank you for that, Shelley. Welcome to all of our panel. Thank you for joining us to share your insights and actions with us. But before we get started on that conversation, I'd like to just get a sense of who is in the room with us today. And for that, we're launching a poll that you should have just seen pop up on your screen right now, and invite you to share what types of actions and engagement you've been doing around either the CTC or the EITC. We'll give everybody just a couple of minutes to respond to that. Okay, looks like a lot of folks have. I'm going to share the results. Let's see. So there are a lot of people here who are not currently engaging around this issue, but are interested in learning more. And that's wonderful. So glad that you came. But quite a few also that are either working, some that are working around the CTC, a little bit more that are working around the EITC, mostly around outreach and enrollment, it looks like. So thank you so much for the actions that you all are taking and for your interest in learning more, and for joining us today to dig into that topic. So to begin the learning and exploration process, I'd like to start by welcoming Sue Renner and Shelley Waters Boots to join us and to introduce us, share a little bit about the CTC Funder Collaborative. What are some of these resources? How could local funders and partners use these resources? Just kind of set the table for us. I'll pass it over to you all now.
Thank you, Sarah. Really, really Happy to be joining you all today. And join with my colleague, Shelley Waters-Boots, who I've been working with the last, it's about 9 months now, I guess, Shelley, on the child tax credit. And Shelley and I started working together with a funders collaborative who's been focused on bipartisan efforts and really trying to figure out how do we create durability over children and family policy across administrations. And when we saw this opportunity with the child tax credit, the expanded child tax credit, there were several of us from that bipartisan funders group who said, you know, let's see if we can link arms and start working on this. So first of all, I just want to set the stage. I'm sure that there's those of you participating who are less familiar with the expanded child tax credit. So I just want to take a minute to explain why it is that this is so profoundly and fundamentally going to change child poverty in this country. The expanded child tax credit is a temporary expansion of the credit that will affect over 90% of children in the United States. And the reason that it is really hitting so many more children than the traditional child tax credit is the refundability. So for the first time, this tax credit impacts children whose parents previously did not file income tax. The second thing that's so profoundly different about it is that the payments are paid monthly. So they're almost prepaid, if you think about it that way, paid in real time when the families need it the most, when they're having those expenses, raising their children. Now, families can choose to receive it in a lump sum if they prefer, and they can wait actually until they file their taxes. But those of us that have been working on the advocacy front have really encouraged families to enroll now and really be able to utilize these dollars in their day-to-day expenses now. The other thing that is really, really important is that the expanded child tax credit does not impact eligibility for other means tested programs. That was something that initially when the tax credit expansion was announced, there was a lot of concern about that. And thankfully, the policy was written in a way that it doesn't affect other means tested programs. So that's something that is also really, really important. And the other thing, and I don't think we have a bullet on it here, but I do want to make a point that the expanded amount is larger for children under 5. And so for very, very young children, families are getting an additional amount of money. That's kind of the basis of it. And I'll now pass the baton to Shelley. And Shelley, could you talk a little bit about what's been done with this funders coming together? What are some of the things that that we've been working on?
Yeah, sure, Sue, thanks. Really good overview. So I think when this expanded credit passed earlier this year, a number of donors, both at the federal level, or national level, but also many at the state and local level, recognized what a super important policy change this was. And we also know from the IRS and the White House that there's about 5 million children in that vicinity that weren't going to get this payment unless they actively filed their taxes or used one of the non-filer portals that has been made available. So foundations came together and really started to talk about sort of 3 strategies. I'm going to focus mostly on this first strategy just based on the survey results, but I do want to let you know there were 3 strategies that this group of donors, so it was about 40 donors that have been sitting around this loosely defined table, mostly just trying to make sure that we're identifying gaps and coordinating resources. I will say, and I've worked in philanthropy now about 15 years. I've never seen this much money move this quickly. So about $25 million kind of coalesced and moved. That's probably a low estimate in the last 6 to 8 months, as Sue said. But the three strategies were: one, implementation of the advanced credit, as Sue described, that was passed earlier this year. And at the same time, and those of you who have done advocacy work know that it's sometimes hard to both implement and advocate at the same time, but we also had a big advocacy push to try to continue this expansion, both the way it's delivered, as Sue talked about, the monthly delivery, and also the increased amount into and past the 2021 tax filing season. That is still, in case any of you want to know, in play with the current Build Back Better policy, but still we have a lot of efforts and tons of organizations that are funded to really help continue to move the advocacy on this issue. And as Sue said, this is a tax credit that was also increased in the Trump tax plan in 2017. So we've been working really hard as a group of donors to really make sure that there are supports for this across all political spectrum. And then the third area was funding in the research space, so that we had better real-time data and understanding on the impact of the child tax credit on how families were spending their funding and their money, and to turn some of that into storytelling to just help us continue to understand advocacy and implementation challenges. So I'll come back to implementation and say that the donor group really worked hard to, in partnership with the White House too, which is also, I should say, and the IRS, really been trying to do a good job of creating partnerships with the donor community, but also with direct service organizations and other outreach partners to make sure that the information about the child tax credit was getting out to parents and to families. And so we funded a couple of things that I think Sue will highlight a bit more of, but really trying to make sure that we had some coordinated efforts and materials. So a lot of people were asking for what can we send out to parents? What do the flyers look like? So we tried to really address some of the communications challenges. We were also working a lot with the technology side. The IRS had not delivered monthly benefits before, so there was a lot of growing pains, I think, in the last 6 months as those payments were coming out. I will note, just timing wise, that the deadline to get people signed up for the advanced payments, and as Sue said, remember, it's like a down payment on the child tax credit that you used to get in one big lump sum the following tax year, was last night at midnight, was the last time to use these portals to sign up. But we'll talk more later about things to be thinking about in 2022, because we really have a chance to bring those families into the tax filing and into the system of getting those payments for their kids. But Sue, I'm going to stop there unless there's something you thought I forgot, but I would love for you to talk a little bit more about some of the resources that we've all been trying to develop together as a funder group, and what have you sort of found helpful from your foundation's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that and just kind of highlight some of the things with the collaborative. And I think what's been interesting about this too, Shelley, as a funder participating, is that you mentioned that the collaborative came together very quickly, really coalesced. And what I love about it is it came together with very little, sort of added infrastructure or, bureaucracy. It was really about funders putting their heads together to say, what are some things we can do better together? And what are some things we can do at scale that then local partners and local organizations can take advantage of? So I love that. And if we go to the slide, the CTC Funders Collaborative highlights, let's go to this. That's great. So I can just tell you about some of those things that were better done at scale. And one of them was media monitoring. We really wanted to be able to see how much information was getting out there about the expanded child tax credit, what kinds of media outlets, and then be able to optimize and build on those. And interestingly, that's something that's quite specialized, and because of that ends up being pretty expensive. So we were able to work with a group called SKDK and really help very, very quickly stand up a team there that would provide daily updates. And I can't even tell you how important this has been to be able to have this kind of media intelligence. And so that's something that I have found to be very powerful, and I think hopefully is something that others have as well. The other thing is kind of along this media idea is social media. And all of you know, I don't need to tell you the power of social media and how we can get messaging out at scale and how it can be deployed so rapidly through social media. But one thing I've learned in the last year and a half working on a social media campaign is how technical it is and how complicated it is now. You know, it's not just this peer-to-peer, you know, let's get our message out there. There is an incredible amount of you know, understanding you have to have about the way that these media channels work. And for that, the collaborative worked with an organization called GMMB, and they, again, very quickly stood up a team to be able to provide a lot of that very specialized and very professional social media, the materials that could be used in conjunction with the social media, because we know we needed also paper materials to distribute and to be able to get out to families. And a big part of their effort has been about enrollment. Because remember what I said earlier, that there was a group of families who had never filed taxes before. Either they had earned less than the filing requirements, or they perhaps are self-employed, or other contractors who just didn't file traditional taxes. And so we put a full court press to get information out to those families. And you'll hear from others on this webinar today how they use those materials. But that's another example of, by a group of funders making a very deep and rapid investment, we were able to get those materials developed and then get them distributed. The next thing that was done through this collaborative was working with Code for America to get a portal set up for enrollment. As Shelley mentioned, this was not something that the IRS had done before. And so to be able to have this portal set up and get families access to sign up for the IRS was just something that was done more quickly and more effectively working with Code for America than maybe if we would have waited months and months and months for others to do it. So it was really great that they stepped up to it, they got it. As Shelley said, the time has been cut off for the monthly payments, but that doesn't mean that we don't want families to still get the information about the tax credit. And the navigator tools, the e-filing, all of that can be still very, very beneficial on that Code for America website. In addition to those three major efforts and major investments, there's also been a whole array of work done through the collaborative to try to make sure that we have a coordinated outreach and advocacy effort. And so things like building on the EITC, almost all the funders in the collaborative are funding local advocacy efforts all throughout the country. And so we've been able to build off and get information about that. We've used that both for outreach as well as for advocacy. I'm sure you're all aware that the Build Back Better plan has been quite contentious. And we are constantly trying to get information out there that shows the efficacy of the expanded CTC, how it has impacted child poverty, and really just get facts to our political leaders. And so through a coordinated effort, we've been able to do kind of a local national play with that, which I think has been very, very effective. So I'll turn it back over to Shelley, and just to talk a little bit more about something that's not on this slide, Shelley, but something that has been hugely impactful is the Community Foundation Fund. So can you tell participants about that?
Yeah, sure. This is a great summary of a lot of work that's been going on, and again, countless advocacy and outreach hours, I think, by many people across the country. One of the conversations that we had with the White House and with the IRS was this need for really trusted partners in community. And a lot of us who work at the national foundation level, I should say, my work is funded by the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. We don't have the same kind of deep partnerships and deep-rooted understanding and community that many of you all do. And so several of the national donors pitched in to set up what is called the Community Foundation Co-op Fund, and to really try to get matching dollars out to local community foundations who could then re-grant to those trusted partners. As Sue said, there's a lot of reasons why people might not be filing their taxes in the past, and it's been really an important lever for foundations to be thinking about who in communities can really transmit that message, help with the filing if necessary, or getting through the portal. So about 24 community foundation grants went out the door in the last few months. I believe that Mary Louise will talk a little bit about being the recipient of one of those. But it continues to be true that we are trying to learn as we go. What are the best ways to find the families that we think need this money the most, and get them into, into the CTC system? So the set of national donors were providing about $50,000 match, and the local community foundations had to match that, and really then start to test some of the best practices and things that we can learn on the ground about how to reach families. And you've got some of the best groups in the country on this panel coming up. So I think that's been super important. It will remain super important for next year's tax filing season to be ready to dive back in on both the CTC and also the earned income tax credit, and really try to help families get these resources. The last thing I'll just say before we start the panel, I know we're running a little short, but Sue, I know that you think a lot about this, and I have my favorite stat. Maybe you have your favorite stat, but it is super important, I think, for those who work in early childhood and for those who focus on grade level reading to understand that this is squarely crucial to the families that we're working with yet. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak preview, but there has been actually started about 5 years ago, a randomized control trial. Sorry.
Yeah, Shelley, it seems, you're breaking up.
Moms 0 to 3 getting up. Oh, am I back? Can you at least hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It might be good to stay video off. So
yeah, I'm going to keep my video off. But my favorite stat, and I'll let Sue give you hers, is that measuring the brain activity of babies between 0 and 1 when moms received this consistent cash transfer actually shows increased brain development and brain growth. So this is super, super important in creating stability in the lives of families, giving moms more time to be talking, singing, reading to babies, decreasing maternal stress and depression. So this money is an important tool in our toolbox as we think about early childhood development. Sue, what's your favorite stat on this before we turn it over to
I have a lot, Shelley, but I would definitely say reducing child poverty. 50% is what, a family's income could be changed by this. So when you think about 2 young children and now having this monthly money coming into their household that could change their family income, increase their family income by 50%. I mean, that is so powerful. And what we love about it is that these dollars allow families to make choices about where their children are in care, how many hours they're working, so that they have some of that nimbleness and flexibility when it comes to the care for their children in those first couple of years of life. So that's something that we really love about it as well.
Thank you both. So it's incredible to hear how much has happened in 6 to 8 months, how much investment and this amazing wealth of resources and knowledge, these data points that you're able to share about the potential and the impact of this incredible resource. So I'd like to welcome our 3 other panelists to join the conversation now, Mary Louise McClintock, Susan True, and Megan Tybus, as we transition to hear a little bit more about what this looks like on the ground. What are the opportunities? What are some action steps that local funders can take? So Shelley and Sue were both sharing a little bit, or I guess mainly Shelley, a little bit about that CT Funder Collaborative's Community Foundation Co-op Fund. And 2 of the local funders that we have joining us today were among that list of 24 community foundations in that cohort of grantees that received support last month. So as we begin to discuss opportunities for local funders to promote the child tax credit, I'd like to start with the 2 of you. That's Mary Louise and Susan. Can each of you take a little bit of time telling me how you see the work around the child tax credit aligning with your foundation's work and how you're using those the grant funds? And then we'll turn to Megan to hear a little bit more after that. Could we start with you maybe first, Mary Louise, how you're using this, what you're doing in Oregon?
Yes, hi, thanks, Sarah, and hello, everyone. It's good to be here. So we had been engaging as a statewide foundation for several years prior to this with a coalition working to increase earned income tax credit uptake within our economic vitality portfolio. And I'll say a little bit more about that coalition a bit later, but part of the context is that Oregon has one of the lowest rates of EITC uptake in the country. I think the pre-COVID estimate for what was left on the table by Oregon families every year was about $137 million. So I had not been involved in that effort at all. I focus on education and early childhood development, but the National Early Childhood Funder Networks that I am part of started getting very mobilized in the summer, seeing this for obvious reasons as a great opportunity to support families when the expanded child tax credit became available. And lots of emails and alerts were coming my way, including the alert about the co-op fund opportunity. So we jumped on that and we're very pleased and excited to receive the grant. I've been collaborating with my economic vitality colleague on this project, but we're actually tapping the foundation's education discretionary funds for our matching grant under the co-op fund, because it's so clear to us, for all the reasons that Shelley's just been talking about, that economic stability for families is connected to education success for our priority populations. I had no trouble making the case for that with our board. So how are we using the funds? We are passing all the funds straight through to a Portland-based nonprofit, Metropolitan Family Service, which runs a program called Cash Oregon. It's an economic empowerment and free tax prep assistance program. We knew that Cash Oregon was already building a pilot approach to expanding outreach and navigation capacity in Multnomah County, where Portland is located. It's Oregon's most populous county, in partnership with the State Department of Human Services. The intent for this pilot is that it could eventually be expanded to other parts of Oregon, but state funds are not expected until at least January, which is late when in terms of the infrastructure needed to help families file taxes by April of 2022 to to say nothing of the November CTC portal deadline that just passed. So this project is about bridge funding for Cash Oregon. They are using the co-op fund grants to support staff, for tax prep volunteer recruitment, for computer hardware, and for contracts and sub-grants with culturally specific organizations for tax navigation and translation services.
Thank you for that overview of how you're using, and again, going back to one of the resources or the assets that local funders bring is knowing who are the trusted messengers who can connect with community groups and target populations. What about you, Susan? How are you utilizing the funds in Santa Cruz County, California?
Yeah, very similar to Mary Louise. I think when we first learned about the co-op grant, we reached out to some of our trusted partners and said, is this something you're interested in? Could we spend $100,000 well? And everyone got back to us, I mean, within about 25 minutes with ideas about how we could bolster this work. And I think it allowed us to realize that we've accidentally built an infrastructure for this work in the last couple of years. With COVID-related pandemic relief, we got much closer to our partners and our partners to families. It feels like we have a much more like a cycle of trust that we can really tap into for this. We had the 2020 census really helped us to bring a peer-to-peer model of outreach that we're drawing on for this effort. All the federal and state stimulus, we had an undocumented assistance fund here in California that we were able to build a network to do outreach for those families as well. So we're able to use this kind of haphazard infrastructure, not to mention wildfires and response. We've been helping families so closely in the last 2 years that we were able to just tap into it really quickly. Of biggest concern for us are those non-filers, as Sue spoke about. And for us, non-filers, we're in a small coastal county. We are primarily agricultural and tourism based in our economy. We have many, many, many mixed immigration status families who were terrified during the Trump years and public charge scares. And so this has just been an incredible opportunity to say, no, this is money in your pocket every single month, and you don't need a social security number. It's just an ITIN. You didn't have to file before. And the work that you all did on the Code for America non-filer process made it so easy. So I think that has been our greatest tool, and we look forward to continuing that even though the window is now closed. So we are also re-granting these funds. We work already with our food bank, which is trying to get more SNAP benefits. We leave about $50 million on the table in SNAP benefits. So this is a great hand-in-hand outreach effort there. Our Family Resource Center collective, our Senior Center, which is, I think somebody had a question about tax prep assistance, and they have already been doing that work. So, and our Community Action Agency. So many of you in local communities have all of those same agencies: a food bank, a community action agency, a seniors network, family resource centers. Tap on those people, build that infrastructure, because I think over and over again, we're going to see that families need those trusted voices to help them apply for these funds. And we've spoken enough about how valuable it is to just have the cash in pockets.
Thank you both for that. So obviously the co-op fund grants can provide a huge boost to local funders that are trying to take on this work. But I want to make sure to stress the fact that they are not a prerequisite. So to underscore that, I'd like to welcome Megan Tybus of United Way of Southeastern Michigan into the conversation now. Megan, I know you're not one of the grantees, but you're doing a lot of work around the child tax credit. So can you tell us a little bit about where you see alignment between promoting the CTC, the child tax credit, and the work of your United Way, the mission of your work in the community? How are you all taking action to ensure that all eligible families receive this important benefit, and to ensure that it's extended into future years?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to everyone. It's great to be here. So there's a lot of alignment with our mission. Our stated goal for the United Way of Southeastern Michigan is to build equitable communities in which children and households can thrive and not just survive. Like most United Ways, we ground our work in the Alice report. which stands for asset limited, income constrained, and employed, if anyone hasn't heard that language, which demonstrates that a large proportion of families struggle to make ends meet, regardless of whether they're below the poverty line or above the poverty line, as the costs of modern life have outstripped wages. Really, staggering percentages of our communities are struggling to make ends meet. It's about 40% in the southeastern Michigan region. It's about 70% in the city of Detroit. That fall below that ALICE threshold. And so the expanded child tax credit provides crucial financial resources for ALICE families to cover the basic costs of food, childcare, and housing. So it's right in line with our mission, and it's right in line with our work. So like most United Ways, we have for years supported the ecosystem of early childhood, early childhood programming and education work, as well as the ecosystem of VITA free tax preparation and efforts to promote the EITC. So it was natural that we would play a leadership role in outreach for the child tax credit, which is at the intersection of those two. So since May, we have been facilitating a major cross-sectoral coalition local to the Detroit region, backed by a local funders collaborative, to get the word out about the child tax credit and, crucially, to connect families at risk of missing out with the support that they need to file and claim the CIT, the child tax credit. So these are just a couple of visuals to give us a little bit of a look and feel of our campaign. The 2-on-1 infrastructure at our United Way is central to, as a sort of central point of contact. We stood up a website, getthethaxfacts.org. It's a little bit in hibernation right now because that filing deadline did pass, and so right now it pretty much just says stay tuned and come back next year. But throughout the summer, that website was providing links to scheduling tax appointments and a lot of information around how the child tax credit works and why it's so important. This campaign was attacking on all fronts. We had paid media, we were pursuing earned media, we had a ground game and grassroots outreach strategy. So you can see one of our bus shelter ads. We were kind of everywhere that we could be to get that outreach out. And so if you want to skip to the next slide, I'll just sort of give an overview of all of the partners. And it has been a huge effort. We've got 4 sort of anchor coordination partners, ourselves, United Way, the city of Detroit, our colleagues at U of M, Poverty Solutions, which is a research center, national level research center, but based in our backyard at the University of Michigan, and then the Community Development Advocates of Detroit, which is a coalition umbrella organization for community development organizations. So we're all at the table. We have 2 tax prep partners, and we did have VITA services going all summer long. That's one of the things that the collaborative funded. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But then we had a whole slew of outreach partners, small grassroots organizations that were doing door knocking and going to church picnics and, calling people and using all of their available networks to get the word out. And then we had a funding coalition. So we had 4 major foundations as well as the United Way that were supporting this work. And I think what's really unique about our campaign and really reflective of this, this webinar, right? This webinar is sponsored by the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and what we're talking about is tax policy. And prior to the expansion of the child tax credit, the organizations on the ground, the funders that cared about early childhood well-being and education, and the funders that cared about tax policy and VITA and the earned income tax credit, they didn't tend to talk to each other very much. And so very early, after the legislation was passed back in May, we brought together this coalition of funders and organizations that don't normally talk to each other. And we started talking, and we've been meeting weekly since May. We launched in June, and our funder coalition came together to fund the work. So we've been doing grassroots outreach, as I said. We've been doing flyers. We've probably distributed about 40,000 flyers. Did paid media, basically every possible kind of paid media that we could think of. We've been doing our best to get into the news with earned media. Obviously, we've been doing social media. We've been doing Google search ads. And then we've had this grassroots ground game. And all of that has been partnered with the free tax prep infrastructure. So our message has been file your taxes, file your taxes, file your taxes, not just because of the child tax credit, but because of the earned income tax credit and the stimulus payments. So, there are folks who have learned about this opportunity through our campaign that have received not just the child tax credit, but also the earned income tax credit and also the missed stimulus payments. And so, those are some big checks that are going out to families as a result of this outreach. And, that campaign has built on infrastructures that already existed. So we already had an EITC coalition, a local EITC coalition that consisted of ourselves at United Way, the City of Detroit, and the two tax prep partners, Accounting Aid Society and Wayne Metro. So that infrastructure already existed. We could build on that existing infrastructure. We already had, United Way is at the center of the early childhood ecosystem, and we promote access to subsidized childcare and quality assistance for high quality, preschool and preschool, birth to 5 age programming. So we were already part of that infrastructure. And then a number of our funding partners were already funding a cohort of community development organizations to improve conditions in community. And so we kind of had that infrastructure already to build in. So we put all those infrastructures together, put together a steering committee, like I said, that's been meeting weekly since May. Our next meeting is this afternoon, and a lot of what we've been funding through this work and through the generosity of our local funders that stepped up to fund the collaborative is capacity. So we were funding the tax prep capacity. When we very first started, we were approached by the local foundations at United Way to be the convener of this, and they wanted to fund outreach. And I said, we cannot fund outreach if we're not funding tax prep capacity. We cannot fund outreach if we are not funding tax prep capacity, because we need to send people somewhere. And the folks that are most likely to be disconnected and least likely to file on their own, they're not going to do so great with navigating an online tax filing on their own, right? We've got a huge digital divide in Detroit. Access to the internet, digital literacy is low. And this was before there was a Get CTC portal. This was before the IRS kept changing their mind about whether or not there was going to be any type of non-filer portal. So we made the decision to invest in the capacity of the tax prep partners. We invested in the capacity of the outreach organizations, and we invested in that coordination capacity, because it takes a lot of effort to kind of bring together all of these partners and think about all of the different ways that we could get the word out, to do the training for the outreach partners. So that's one of the things where U of M, picked up that task, and to sort of have the capacity to reflect and learn. So our meeting agenda for today is to dive deep into the analysis that our partners at U of M have done for us to help us reflect on what we can do better in January. So I will pause there, but it has definitely been quite the effort to put together this coalition locally and try to get the word out.
Yeah, that's incredible. All of the different kind of partners and entities and pieces of work really that you stitched together, and incredible that you were doing tax preparation throughout the summer, and that amazing list of outreach partners. You were touching on something related to the next question that I wanted to ask a little bit in your response then, but I'm sure that there's a number of funders who are listening in to today's conversation who might feel that federal tax policies are beyond the purview of the work of a funder that's focused, a local funder that's focused on children. So I'd like to ask all three of you to share what insights or reflections you would offer to the folks who are listening in today on the roles that state and local funders can play in this work around the child tax credit. And I'd like to stay with you to begin responding to this, Megan. You were touching on it a little bit earlier, but what else would you like to add with regards to that?
Absolutely. I mean, to my mind, it's really simple. The child tax credit expansion is perhaps the greatest opportunity for leverage and return on your investment that I can imagine. And that is because there's just so much funding coming from the federal government, right? $77 billion in total nationwide has already gone out to families. That's hundreds of $millions flowing into each and every metro area in the country. That's an infusion of resources that local funders can only dream about. But there are gaps and cracks and last mile execution challenges. And that's where state and local funders really need to step up to make sure that that infusion of federal resources that only the federal government is in a position to provide makes it to each and every single one of the intended beneficiaries. And so I think that the state and local funders are best positioned to fund that infrastructure and that capacity building that I was talking about that's necessary at a local level to ensure that, that there are no dollars that are left on the table, and to fund that hard to fund, but also important work of coordination and collaboration. So, I've talked to half a dozen folks around the country over the past 6 months about, what has been successful in Detroit. And my answer is always the fact that we have a coordinated infrastructure, and that this campaign would not work without that sort of central steering committee that's coming together to do the work each and every single week and is coordinating the work of all the tentacles of the campaign. But that takes time and energy to do. And in the social sector, we're all strapped, we're all doing 100 things. So funding that capacity to do the work of building the relationships, building the partnerships, with folks that are and organizations that are positioned to actually get the word out and to be those trusted messengers. Like, that infrastructure doesn't come together just overnight without the capacity to steer it. And I think that this is, childhood well-being is family well-being, is economic well-being at the end of the day. And families need the resources to not have to worry about how they're going to put food on the table or if they're going to have a roof over their heads at the end of the week. And when we provide families with the economic resources that they need to survive without having to worry about it each and every single day, then they have the ability to put their time into figuring out how they're going to thrive and how can they invest in themselves and how can they do the things that parents are supposed to do, like, reading to their kids and talking to their kids about their day and investing in their kids' hopes and dreams and investing in their own hopes and dreams and their ability to provide for their family and their own human capital. But it's really hard to do that if you're worried about, where your next meal is going to come from. And I guess the last thing I would just say is, outreach and enrollment of hard to reach populations is a challenge across so many areas. I think it's especially difficult with the CTC. For a variety of reasons, but we've seen it historically with the EITC. We've seen it in uptake of other benefits. We see it in eviction prevention and foreclosure work. We see it in early childhood work, getting folks enrolled in the subsidies for early childhood care. We're seeing it in COVID vaccine outreach. For outreach to be successful and result in increased uptake, the organizations that are best positioned to do the outreach work need adequate funded capacity to do that. The organizations that are best positioned to do the enrollment, or in this case, tax preparation, need adequate funded capacity to do that. And then the coalition itself needs adequate funded capacity to do the coordination work of building the relationships, designing the strategy, keeping all of the pieces moving, and reflecting and figuring out, going to national webinars to learn about best practices from other parts of the country to figure out what can we bring back, what can we adapt for our context. And that is all local work that is crucial to ensuring that 100% of these federal resources actually make it to the families that they're intended to serve. And that's work that local funders are best positioned to fund. And there's a phenomenal ROI on the back end, millions and millions of dollars coming into your communities that might not otherwise make it.
Thank you. Yeah, great opportunity. But with some of those challenges, how do we make sure we achieve that opportunity? What would you add, Susan?
Yeah, I was talking to another local funder who was saying, I'm not sure we should get involved in this, sort of for the reasons you mentioned, Sarah. And we had a really good conversation about I think everything that Megan just said they're the same conversations we're having here. And for this local funder, the turning point was thinking about the early research on the earned income tax credit and how much more it does even, and not to get into the policy debate about it, but then raising the minimum wage, because it gets money where working families are. And it's so targeted, and it really is our most elegant, I think, of our low income tax programs for families. And so I think it's just an ongoing conversation. The idea of a community leaving funds on the table, the way Mary Louise spoke of all of Oregon, in our community, that's been really true around SNAP benefits. And nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to see a family go without and to struggle and to have private dollars keep trying to fill this sort of human services hole. And especially when we look at, wealth and asset and income inequality, when there are resources that we could capture and bring here. I think it like Megan said, it's pretty much a no-brainer. I don't think anyone is resistant to this locally anymore. Although we have had some conversations about, like you said, what are we doing with tax policy? Do we even know about this? But we know how to get resources to families.
Mm-hmm. So Mary Louise, you're a little bit unique in this panel in that you are both a statewide funder and a local funder. Any additional insights that you would add to what Susan and Megan just shared?
Well, of course, I would echo what everyone has been saying about the incredible leverage opportunity. The funds that we're investing in access to tax credits is just so modest compared to the benefit that Oregon families can receive. And yes, we're operating locally by funding through the co-op grant. We are supporting a project focused just on one community, but it's a pilot with ramifications for statewide scaling, and it's a statewide community foundation where that's very important to us. But I'd like to spotlight a little bit another aspect of our work on this, which is in supporting the work that's going on to build a stronger public sector infrastructure, which is another way for us to leverage a relatively small amount of funding. As I mentioned earlier, we've been engaging with a coalition that includes other foundations, includes business leaders, some nonprofit organizations. We're working together on both short-term and longer-term improvements, including a sustainable source of funding from the state for a statewide tax support network that would also include tribal governments, as well as the nonprofits that are providing tax prep assistance. So a couple ways that we are helping: we're paying the cost of a contract with a consultant who is doing a landscape analysis for this coalition and convening the coalition and helping move the work forward. We're also contributing to the cost of a lobbyist who is going to work with us on agendas at the state level in upcoming legislative sessions. And finally, as a funder, we've been in touch with our US senators to urge them to support the extension of the tax credit expansions as part of Build Back Better.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So taking it to the state policy level, that's great. Lovely to hear about that. So in the first section of today's conversation, Sue was sharing some of the tools that the CTC Funder Collaborative had either created or compiled together for local funders to use. Things like the Code for America's Get CTC app, the heat map that can identify pockets of non-filers, some of that research and the advocacy and the communications tools that local funders can utilize in reaching populations and making the case for these credits. Can each of you share just a little bit about how you're using them, or if you haven't been using them to date, how you see yourself using them moving forward with partners in your community, and what advice you would have to offer to folks listening in? And we'll go in reverse order this time. So starting with you, Mary Louise, this time.
Well, Cash Oregon, our co-op fund grantee, is definitely using the social media tools, the GMMB tools. And they've been raving to me about the heat map. And I think, Sarah, you put a link to that heat map earlier, but that was made available to us very early on in the effort. In fact, as part of our application, that was available for us to look at. And Cash Oregon has been doing this tax prep work for a number of years, but they've never had access to a resource like the heat map, and it's been incredibly useful for them in targeting their efforts. We, Oregon Community Foundation, we've been sharing the social media tools with other grantees apart from our co-op fund project. And we're going to be doing more with our own social media platforms in the coming weeks and months. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I believe that we're going to be able to tap into what's available. But certainly just making sure to help push those resources out to our grantees around the state, because they're really, really useful.
Right. Yeah, they are amazing to look through all of the tools that they've compiled. What would you add to that, Susan? How are you utilizing the tools or sharing them with your partners to utilize?
Yeah, everything Mary Louise said, although I think we might be underutilizing those heat maps, so I appreciate the tip. And I think all the staff at our frontline service organizations have been so relieved to have really well done Spanish materials. I would just add for any of you in direct outreach work, especially with mixed immigration status families, the Spanish speaking tools have been great and just have felt like a huge relief to folks who are used to translating stuff on the fly and, you know, it not being as polished as they'd like. So there's been a lot of satisfaction with those. So make sure to check those out.
What about you, Megan? Are you utilizing them yet or expecting to?
Well, I'm new to the party, so I'm taking good notes here. So I'll say that in Michigan, we are a little unique because we have a lot of state tax credits that are run through the state tax code. So we haven't used the Get CTC portal as much as in other places, because we were sort of really pushing this idea of no dollar left unclaimed, and that the no dollar left unclaimed includes not just the child tax credit, but the other federal credits available, and also the state credits available. And because we did have the ability to fund the tax prep infrastructure in the Detroit area, we were able to push that. That said, there are hurdles to filing your taxes, even when there is a free service to help you do that. So one of the things that I expect we'll be testing as we go into the spring tax season is more around sort of whether or not we get better uptake to the portal or to the pitch for a tax appointment. Our pitch for a tax appointment is always going to be our first choice. But if folks are sort of unable or unwilling for whatever reason, we certainly want to have them fill out that portal and get those dollars. So I'm checking out the heat maps. I'm intrigued. So looking forward to taking advantage of more of these resources as we move forward.
Well, come back to us and tell us how you're using them after the fact. It sounds like you're doing a lot already. So Sue, I'd love to welcome you back into the conversation now, because in addition to being one of the funders that's a part of this CTC Funder Collaborative, the Mirage Foundation is taking action on its own. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that and what advice you would offer or what advice you would, I guess, add to what the other panelists have just shared in terms of actions that funders can take around this issue.
I'd be happy to share, Sarah. Thank you. So we're sort of similar to what Megan said in terms of we had some existing infrastructure that we decided to make a shift and really target it to the CTC. So that infrastructure is a national social media campaign that we stood up during the presidential election to lift up the childcare crisis and really shine a light on the crisis of affordability and access, and flip the script that childcare affordability is not a personal parent failure, but it's really a societal failure. We need to recognize childcare as the public good that it is, and give parents a way to be able to talk about their own challenges in a really less personal way. And so because we had this platform stood up, we decided early this year to make a shift and really, really focus it on the child tax credit. So if we go to the next slide, you can see where we were able to then take our social media contracts for advertising that we have worked with a PR company. We were able to take all of that, and I say shift, but it really isn't a shift because it is all about childcare affordability, but it's almost like putting a focus on it with the child tax credit. And for all the reasons that my co-panelists have talked about today, we believe that the child tax credit is one of the most, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most monumental ways that we can help families with their monthly budgets. So through our campaign, we have a pretty phenomenal reach, 1.25 million to date on specifically our CTC messaging. We also have something that's interesting, and I want to highlight to others that may be involved in social media campaigns, is the engagement. It just really absolutely blows us away to see how our social media ads are getting shared, how people are passing them along, and really sort of the mixed messaging here around enrollment. We are talking a lot to parents about please look at this as a resource for your family, but we're also doing advocacy because we believe, as others have said, Mary Louise said about lobbying, we believe that our elected officials need to know more about how these dollars are impacting families' lives on a day-to-day basis. And so as part of that advocacy, we've created a toolkit. You can get access that at the Care for All Children website. We encourage you to use our social media ads. They're all really available to share. And also the power of storytelling. As I just mentioned, we found out early in the Care for All Children campaign that parents are hesitant to talk about childcare affordability. They find it to be very personal, and they're often not willing to talk with their employer about it, or certainly not their elected officials. And so we want to flip that script, and we want to really start telling their story. And I'd like to share, just one example of how we're doing that. Care for All Children linked arms with a nonprofit organization called Saver Life, which promotes financial literacy and helping families with their budgets. And this is an example of a story that we were able to capture on video, and something that has really taken off on social media.
We were bringing that video up right now.
Okay.
In just a second. Here we go.
Perfect.
Although I can't hear it, Sierra, can you replay with video with the audio?
Hi, my name is Devorah L. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I have 5 kids, ages 7, almost 6, 4, 2, and 6 months. I am a full-time religious studies teacher at a private school in a suburb of Philadelphia. I am using the child tax credit payments to cover expenses such as childcare. My husband is a freelancer, and he is currently working on a project he hasn't gotten paid yet. So knowing that I have the child tax credit makes me a lot more comfortable. It means I can comfortably cover my bills until we wait for his first new freelancing checks to come in.
Thank you. I'm glad we were able to see that video. And we did a series of those that were really, again, trying to normalize this conversation about childcare affordability and really showing how the child tax credit is impacting that. The other thing we've done with the campaign, and specifically with CTC, is something that I would like to encourage other funders to consider. We could go to the next slide. And that's lifting up the voices of your foundation founders, business leaders in your community. I loved at the opening of the webinar, I'm not sure if you guys all saw the campaign for grade level reading saying philanthropy more than just money. And we totally believe that and believe that there is a tremendous amount of power in David Mirage's voice and his influence. And to that effect, we have made a very focused effort to place his voice in business publications, and you'll see several of them listed here. I would really, really encourage you guys to think about on a local level, state level, who are those business leaders who could talk about this? Because again, we need to figure out how do we flip the script and really be able to talk about the child tax credit in a way that it resonates with different audiences. And certainly business audiences is one of those that we're trying to connect with. So we have used David Mirage's voice and other business leaders to try to do that.
I love that first kind of reiterating the statement that, you know, the campaign really does believe that philanthropy plays so many roles, and the check is certainly not the most important. There's so many roles that philanthropy can play. And I also love the way you're sharing, like lifting up stories and voices from such a wide range of perspectives. The families who are benefiting and putting a real face on these funds and the challenges around childcare, but also, you know, leaders, that business leaders can really make the case and push this forward. So that's lovely. So much has been shared by all of you so far about the work that you have done. I know that the portal just closed for the IRS yesterday, but there is so much work left ahead in the coming year. So before we transition to Q&A, just love to hear what's planned for 2022 from each of you. What opportunities do you see and what actions are you planning? And we'll start with you for this one, Sue, if you want to share what Mirage is thinking about for 2022.
Permanency. We've got to get this permanent, you guys. And I know it's tough sometimes when you're at the local level to think about federal advocacy, but there's lots and lots of ways to tap in and engage in that. And Mary Louise, as you mentioned, with your lobbyist and working with your senators, I mean, it's so critical, you guys. And we got to be able to do this in a bipartisan way, you know, so that's going to be our push in 22. Absolutely no question about it.
What would you add to that, Susan?
Yeah, definitely the policy work. And then, you know, I mentioned that we're building this whole thing on a pretty haphazard infrastructure that's come about over the last couple of years. And I think what Megan said is really true, that we have to invest in these organizations that that families trust and are going to go to over and over again in the time that we're in. So I think, you know, looking at the return on this investment and really making sure that they have the expanded capacity to keep serving families is next for us.
Mary Louise, what would you add?
Well, I think that the policy work is going to continue to be the most important. Well, we may make some other grants related to going directly to the nonprofits that are best positioned to reach families. But we found that when we did some outreach to sort of probe on interest in partnering with us, when we had the co-op fund opportunity, that many of the organizations that are the trusted messengers were reluctant to get involved and to ramp up their capacity to support family access to the tax credits if it was just a one-time opportunity. And so that's just keeps, for that reason, we keep circling back to the importance of the state funding so that it's sustainable and stays in place and as an ongoing support system for families. So I think policy will continue to be the biggest focus.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Megan?
Institutionalization. So I would say that the policy is certainly, a key part of that. Our policy team is talking with our congressional delegation right now. It's United Way's Hill Day, and so we are talking about the legislation to implement, an expansion through the Build Back Better Act. But in addition to that, the infrastructure that I talked about earlier that we built this campaign on top of, it's an infrastructure that's sort of there, but it relies a little too much on personal relationships. It relies a little too much on everybody remembering each year that this is a thing that we do and this is a funding priority. So I really am hopeful to use this moment that has galvanized these new funders to the table to build a more permanent infrastructure. As this is a thing we do every year, and then to institutionalize some of the partnerships that will make that outreach a little bit easier. We were definitely doing the whole building the plan as we were flying it all summer long, and I think we've got a ton of lessons learned to reflect on. Again, like I said, outreach to hard to reach populations. It's hard. There's a reason we call them hard to reach populations, and this particular population is harder to reach than most. It's not like we're looking for everybody who's pregnant or everybody who has a 2-year-old, right? Like specific, more definable demographics where you can kind of find the places and spaces where those folks hang out in greater concentration. We're looking for the needles in the haystack of folks who are unlikely to file, but demographically are not that different from folks who have already filed, right? We're looking for that sort of last mile 10%, and we're looking to convert our outreach to taxes filed, dollars claimed at a higher rate and a more measurable rate. So we're in the process of sort of reevaluating everything that we did this past summer and fall, and saying, what worked, what had promised, but we didn't really have the time or bandwidth to fully execute on, and how can we double down on some of those really promising strategies for the spring? How can we pivot on some things that maybe didn't work quite so well, right? That door knocking seems like sort of an obvious strategy, but it's rather inefficient. We're not finding a very high percentage of people that are the people that we're trying to reach, because it's a blanket approach. And so, how can we take advantage of other door knocking campaigns for other more broad-based things and just sort of tack this on? Or how can we, we've had a lot of success using text messaging. So how can we bolster our text messaging partnerships? And how can we better connect that sort of first mile outreach with last mile execution and make that more of a, sort of soup to nuts process in a really effective and efficient way for everyone.
Thanks. Shelley, what would you add in terms of opportunities that you see in the work that's ahead in 2022 from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back in. First, I think Megan said a lot of it, which is really trying to do a very fast lessons learned document that we can share with this emerging field. And I call it an emergent field because it's really, as Megan talked about, mushing together a lot of actors and players and fields to think about this. So I think we will try to do that going into 2022 as another support for those at the local level working on this. A couple of things that I've been thinking about, some of this will address a little bit what Mary Louise was talking about as well, which is we have a human services delivery system that's largely delivered at a state and local level. And now we have one of the largest poverty programs being attempted to be delivered at the federal level. So in some ways, we have to think about that infrastructure too. And, I would say to your donors, Mary Louise, who are maybe a little like, should we build this because it's only a year, or even if BBT passes, it's only 2 years, that we were missing families before, and we don't have the infrastructure to have our tax policy benefit supports connected to our human services supports. And there is some research that suggests somewhere upwards of 75% of these non-filing families are on SNAP, Medicaid, or TANF. That's an estimate, so we don't know that in proof yet. Megan, it'll be great to see your U of M data to just sort of see what we're finding about where we think these families are. But those are the kinds of lessons that I think we have to be thinking about in real time, but also going ahead and building this infrastructure. Some of that is with your public sector partners. I noticed a lot of schools or school districts on here. There was some very interesting work done with the pandemic EBT data matches that had already happened between your human services SNAP programs and your school districts. So thinking about how we can get to these families in pretty efficient ways. A surprising point, and I'll echo something Megan said, is that there were a fair number of families who actually did do this, DIYers, did it on their own through a text message. So really, there is another last mile of the harder to reach families that I think are going to need more support. But for a lot of families, they were able to use these portals. For 2022, it is unclear at this point how the IRS will handle separate portals on CTC. So remember, the first 6 months of these payments this year are just half of what families are eligible for this tax filing season. To get the second half, families need to file their taxes. So Megan's strategy in Detroit and what Susan was talking about, it really pushing people to the tax infrastructure is super smart for 2022. And luckily, hopefully, you'll have more VITA sites stood up in tax filing season than what we were seeing around the country post tax filing season when these payments were coming on board. So I think that's super important. The other thing I'll note is that if you had a baby last year, you were not able to get any of the advance payments. There was no way to claim and say, I had a new child. So anybody in your community who's low income and had babies last year should be on our high list of trying to track down. And again, I think, as everybody has said, the EITC is also available. So again, keeping sort of folks thinking about this, this push into the either a simplified tax filing push, and Code for America does have a simplified filing tax resource called getyourrefund.org. I think that will be likely, while they're working out the details with the IRS, like one of the main places we'll be pointing people early on until we figure out whether there's a separate portal just for these particular benefits. So those are some of the things we're thinking about. And trying to also think about, I will say in BBB, Build Back Better, the one thing that would be permanent or in language now is the full refundability. So the monthly payments might change after another year, the amount of money might change, but if BBB passes what's currently in language, that full refundability, which I know we all care a lot about, is still in, has language around making that piece permanent. So, so that's another reason why we've got to build these structures and do the kinds of things that all of you are doing in your communities to just make sure that this is another really powerful tool in our toolbox around child well-being and family outcomes. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So many things to touch on there from all of you. We are transitioning to Q&A now. We've got a little bit of time left before the end of our 90 minutes together. And speaking of kind of the policy opportunities and how to make sure that Build Back Better and the components around the child tax credit and the refundability are included, we have one question from an attendee who's asking, who are the most impactful organizations in the policy arena that funders should be seeking out? Who can they be reaching out to advance policy, to make sure that either it's local or national? Who'd like to take that on first? And also, I'll just share that a poll just popped up on your screen. If you are interested in learning more about the CTC Funder Collaborative, let us know. We'll share that information with them so that we can make that connection so that you can find out more about all of these resources, the research and the work that they're doing.
Well, I'm happy to start. I know Sue's doing a lot on the policy space too, but who we've been funding are, again, a lot of the traditional child advocacy organizations that are very articulate about how these payments are critical for our hopes to reduce child poverty, but also some unlikely messengers are ones, and Sue highlighted business as an important voice on this. I also think there have been of late, and some of you have states that I think have even experimented with the universal basic income pilots. So there's a group of organizations that are really working hard on economic mobility. So I think it's a little bit all of the above. But if we think about how the policy federally has gotten carved down, I think really thinking about those moderates and the voices of constituents that can sort of sway, I think, some of these more moderate House and senators. I will say what's interesting about this policy is that it reaches so many families. It's really not hard to find people willing to speak out about this in district, in state, really reaching out with those real stories. So I think it's a little bit all of the above in my view. Sue, what would you add?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think certainly the child organizations First 5 Years Fund has taken a big role in coordination and trying to set some tables on a weekly basis where other advocacy organizations can link arms. So I would definitely look to them and maybe go to their website and look at some of their resources that they've developed on it. But like you said, Shelley, I also think we need to think about organizations like our local chambers, United Way boards. They can be very, very powerful messengers. And so I would want to think about, again, that durability, that this is not, a left-owned policy. This is really a policy for America, and it's a policy for American children. And so think about some of your organizations, faith-based organizations, I think can also be very, very powerful messengers with this.
Thanks. Who else would like to jump in?
I would just echo that. It certainly depends on the makeup of your own state legislature, but I would think bipartisan, diverse, funding a coalition of groups from all parts of the spectrum, that would make a big impact with legislators if they're hearing from a variety of sectors.
Anything, Megan or Susan, that you'd like to add?
Y'all covered it. I agree.
Well, somebody else was asking about whether or not Child Welfare League of America, a widely respected advocacy voice for the country's most vulnerable and at-risk children and families, could be a possible partner in doing some of that advocacy work. And if there's anything you'd like to say in response to that. I'm seeing some nods. I'm just wondering if there's anything beyond yes.
Yeah, I would just say, I think they're at the coalition tables, the advocacy coalition tables. I think I saw somebody from Children's Defense Fund online here too. That's been another organization that has been able to crosswalk multiple child serving advocacy organizations. So I think they've been involved for sure on that. And I will say we have an expansion to the EITC that hits a lot of those youth aging out of foster care too. So there will be an even better chance to kind of address some of the EITC and CTC interplays next year. We didn't have the advanced credit for EITC, but and I think that, Sarah, there's a webinar coming up by the EITC Funders Network on this exact topic. So I will get you a link. So in case anybody's interested in the youth and young adult expansion in the EITC.
Yes, please do that. And I can include that in the follow-up email that we'll be sending out to all registrants. So you'll also, all registrants will also be getting all of these links that were shared. I think that we are coming to the end of our 90 minutes together. So I'd just like to point out that we posted a poll on everyone's screen just a few moments ago. It's an evaluation poll. It's a way that we can get feedback from all of you who've attended on how these sessions are meeting your needs. So please just take a quick moment before we wrap up and share your thoughts with us for that. I just want to say a huge thank you to our amazing panel today. Thank you all for joining us and sharing the work and the insights that you're doing. Thank you to Sue Renner, to Mary Louise McClintock, to Susan True, to Megan Tibus, And a special thanks to Shelley Waters Boots for helping me to plan this conversation and engage this amazing panel of leaders around this work. I'd also like to say thank you to all of you who took the time to join in with us and learn together about the importance, this wonderful opportunity around the child tax credit, and the actions that local funders and partners can take in ensuring its permanency and ensuring that it's reaching all of the families that could benefit from it. I'd also invite all of you to tune back in for future sessions, including one that we've got happening later this afternoon in the 3 p.m. time slot. It'll be a conversation with outschool.org and some of its partners and grantees as they share how outschool.org is working to increase access to fun and social learning experiences for low-income kids, families, and communities. And in terms of looking forward to next week, for anyone who missed the incredible session that we hosted in partnership with Rollins Center for Language and Literacy and Education Week last month, focused on how to connect trauma-informed practices with the construction of the deep reading brain. We'll have a special rebroadcast of that session next week in the 3 p.m. time slot. And then the following week, we will wrap up the month of November with a session hosted in partnership with the Bezos Family Foundation, looking up some of the major lessons that have come out of COVID-19 in terms of education and opportunities and challenges for that. And as we get closer to the holiday and the end of the year, we'll continue a robust lineup of sessions in the month of December, starting off on December 7th with a session hosted in partnership with Overdeck Family Foundation, looking at how out-of-school STEM programs can boost both social, emotional, and academic learning. Registration links for all of these sessions are posted in the chat box, so I'd encourage you to click on those and register and make plans to join us for these upcoming sessions. But again, just a huge thank you to our panel and to everyone who joined in today. I hope to see you in upcoming sessions as well. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Take care.